everybody, it's me, and as I promised, I'm about to make some sourdough bread. This is the first part. It takes at least 12 hours, but it's called proofing. You've got to proof your starter so you have enough starter for the next day too. What I like to do, I stir it with a chopstick. You have the consistency of really good pancake batter in here. When it comes from the refrigerator like mine just did, it won't be bubbling like crazy like it should be when you're creating the starter on the counter. Now I usually take loop-de-loop. Oh, that's lovely, isn't it? One. Yeah. And a half cups. And I mix that with 1.5 cups of filtered or bottled water. Don't use tap water. Chlorine is bad for little bacteria. And oh, look at all that flour he's got. A cup and a half of flour. Mix it up nicely with your chopstick. If you want to use a wire whisk, I suppose you can. It won't be in contact with the starter for very long. But you'll notice also I'm using a ceramic non-reactive bowl for this. You want to make sure your starter has every opportunity to get as nasty as it can. Now this needs to sit for a minimum of 12 hours. If you want your bread to be more sour tasting, which I generally like, you let it go for longer than 12 hours. No problem with me. Anyway, doesn't matter if there's a few lumps in there, just as long as you get it nice and mixed. And you'll notice, I'll bring the camera over here. You'll notice it's starting to bubble up right away. It loves the warmth, it loves to be fed. And you got to remember to feed your starter at least once a week. I like to put in 1/4 to 1/2 cup of flour and the same amount of water every time I feed it. Okay, now we've got the mix. We cover it with a towel so it can still breathe and get more bacteria in there, but no flies will nest in there. And we wait till tomorrow. See you later. Okay, we're back with our sourdough bread. Now this is going to be as much of a surprise for me as it is for you. Let's take a look and see how our starter is doing. It's been proofing for 22 hours. So let's have a look at the great unveiling. Oh my, that's nice and bubbly. Yes, it is. All right, looking good. Let's get on with it. The first thing I'm going to do, I melted a tablespoon of butter in the microwave. You'll notice I have it covered with plastic wrap because there's so much moisture in butter. If you don't cover it, it explodes and it will get everywhere in there. You'll have quite the buttery microwave oven. I'll take that tablespoon of butter. I mix in 1/2 cup of whole milk. This warms the milk, but not too much, just enough so that it's very usable. Look at that, all that's set up and I forgot my chopstick. So I give it a little stir and there you go. Okay, now into my mixing bowl. I'm going to put 2 cups of our freshly proofed starter. One. Oh, it smells so good. 2. All right, we've got 2 cups of starter in there. And to that, we add a teaspoon of salt, a tablespoon of sugar, and 3 cups of flour. Now, a lot of recipes will say use bread flour or use all-purpose flour. I like the all-purpose flour because it makes for a better rise. Bread flour is a lot more refined than all-purpose, so it's going to be, you're not going to get the density of the bubbles that you like in sourdough bread. So we add 3 cups of this, 1, 2, 3, and we start to mix it. Okay, now you see I'm using a basic KitchenAid mixer with a dough hook in it. Do it all the labor. This way you don't have to spend all your life kneading it on a hard wooden surface. I add the butter and milk mixture. And let it mix on up for a while. Now, if you see that it's running a little thick, if it doesn't seem to be smoothing out and forming a nice satiny ball, just be patient. Give it a little more time. You could add a little more milk to it, a tablespoon at a time, though not too much or you'll end up overdoing it. When I got this mixture, it said to never use the dough hook on speeds higher than 2. And I found out why. That's because when you raise the speed limit above 2, the darn thing starts to walk and it can crash off the surface. So I usually just hang on to it. And it smooths out my dough very quickly this way. You know, it would be nice if the instructions said, don't use it over a speed of 2 and here's why. But no, they just assume that you'll obey. While my dough continues to knead, I'm going to put the rest of this fruit starter in with my regular starter. And that's how you prolong the species. As you can see, it makes my cup just about full. Mix it up with the old, with the new, with the old, with the new, with your chopstick. And it might do well if you leave this out on the counter overnight before you put it back in the fridge, just to help it through its shock. Because we always want our starter to be happy. Okay. Now we take our sourdough and we massage it a little bit into a ball where it doesn't seem to have any seams, because that way it just finishes off better when it does its final rise. Get it stretched out a bit so it forms kind of a loaf. Make sure it's dusted on all sides with your flour. As you can see, it's not very big, it's just a nice flat loaf, kind of like focaccia. Anyway, we take that and we're going to cover it again with its towel and let it sit for another hour and a half to 2 hours. And I'll be back. Okay, it's the next day. I'm back. As you can see, I let the dough sit on the counter overnight. That's a long time. That's a lot more than the hour and a half I told you it was going to be. But hey, it's sourdough bread. It just gets more sour. Let's have a look at it, shall we? Oh, yeah, that got bigger all right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to preheat the oven. I'm going to put the creuset in there as well and preheat it to 375 degrees. Okay, we're going to start the oven at 375. And we're going to add our cast iron dish. Because it needs to preheat also. And then when everything is ready, we put the bread into it after we grease it a little bit. We throw in a couple of ice cubes so that we get some steam so that the crust can develop even more crispy. And we'll see how that looks later. The oven is preheated. So now we take our cast iron dish out, moving as quickly as we can so we can keep all that nice heat in the oven. Open the dish, spray it with a bit of cooking spray, This is a generic brand, not Pam. Then we take our dough, gently put it in here. Careful not to burn yourself. And then we add some ice. The ice will create steam, which helps establish the crust. And then back on into the oven. Okay, I like to let it sit for a few minutes at 375 degrees so it gets back up to 375 degrees. And then I'm going to turn it down to 350 and leave it in there for 35 to 40 minutes. At which point I'll take the lid off and take a look. The lid does not go back on at that if you need it to bake longer, it just stays off, creating more brown into the crust. And let's take a look at that when that's done, shall we? Okay, let's take a look in the oven and see what we've got, shall we? Okay, as you see, I took the lid off of the pan with about 10 minutes left in the baking, just so we get more brown on it. Now let's see, if I did this right, it should come right out and fall on the floor. There we go. Okay, there's our nice loaf. It's got a good thump to it. Feels like it's got a great crust, and it'll be enjoyed as soon as it has a good half hour or so to cool down first, so it remains its structure. I love the way it cracks and has that rustic look to it, don't you? Anyway, make some yourself. Enjoy it.